This is a big segment. USAID. All right. So Trump was asked. He gave a kind of like impromptu press conference out on the tarmac. And this is what he said about USAID.
What's going on there?
Well, it's been run by a bunch of radical lunatics, and we're getting them out. USAID, run by radical lunatics, and we're getting them out, and then we'll make a decision.
All right. So Trump's getting the radicals out of USAID. So it's being merged into the State Department, 3 U.S. officials said to CBS off the record. USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, will be merged into the State Department with significant cuts in the workforce, but it will remain a humanitarian aid entity, 3 U.S. officials told CBS News. Officials in President Trump's administration are expected to announce the moves in the coming days. Discussions about the extent of the funding reductions remained fluid on Monday. Mr. Trump made Secretary of State Marco Rubio the acting administrator of USAID, sources said, and Rubio himself soon confirmed it to reporters traveling with him in El Salvador. ABC News earlier reported his status as chief. Rubio said in a letter to congressional leaders that he has authorized Peter Morocco, Director of Foreign Assistance at State, to perform the duties of Deputy Administrator of USAID and to begin a, quote, review and potential reorganization of USAID's activities to maximize efficiency and align operations. USAID oversees humanitarian development and security programs in about 120 countries around the world. Yes, we will get into that. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Research Service, USAID, quote, provides assistance to strategically important countries and countries in conflict, leads U.S. efforts to alleviate poverty, disease, and humanitarian need, and assists U.S. commercial interests by supporting developing countries' economic growth. Foreign aid overall, of which USAID is one part, accounts for less than 1% of the federal budget. So yes, you can clearly see what kind of a line CBS News is pushing. I felt it's important to include that by contrast to the reality, which we'll get to. Rubio told reporters that U.S. tax dollars need to further U.S. national interest. The move to merge USAID with the State Department and reduce its funding may raise legal questions, however. USAID was established in 1961 by an act of Congress, so the president would require congressional approval to shut it down. USAID, like most of the rest of the federal government, has been operating under a temporary funding measure that expires in March. Mr. Trump said Sunday that the agency was run by a bunch of radical lunatics. We're getting them out. USAID headquarters was closed on Monday because of a security incident, sources said. But the incident stemmed from efforts over the weekend by personnel from the Elon Musk-run Department of Government Efficiency, known as DOGE, to access USAID systems. Sources told CBS News it was related to the USAID Chief of Staff, Matt Hobson, a recent Trump appointee, who attempted to block DOGE officials from getting access to USAID systems. 2 top security officials were fired Monday for attempting to block access to DOGE, according to multiple sources. Hobson resigned Sunday. Musk, the Trump administration's billionaire advisor, had said he'd spoken in detail about USAID with Mr. Trump. Quote, he agrees we should shut it down, Musk said in a late-night live session on his social media platform X. Not all of Mr. Trump's top advisors agreed with the idea of shutting down the agency completely, several sources said. So now, naturally, the Democrats have been speaking out against this. Now, here's Ilhan Omar. She was among many speakers outside USAID offices speaking out against this action.
Do you want the executive making the only decisions in this country, or do you want the elected representatives that you send to Washington making those policies?
Okay, so this is the problem right here. The government has failed the American people so badly that that is not a gimme that she thinks it is. That is not the mic drop she thinks it is. Yeah, even the applause in the crowd is kind of weak. They're kind of like, yeah, right. Most people no longer trust Congress. They no longer trust their elected officials. And when people lose faith in democracy, when they don't believe that democracy can deliver for them, well, when they see somebody through what are clearly not constitutional means, authoritarian means, achieving an end that they know, let's face it, would Congress have ever shut down USAID? Ever? Ever? They cheer it on. But as we'll see, it's more complicated than that. They're not shutting it down. They're bringing it further under their control. They're centralizing it. I think the way a lot of people are taking this is very naive. But right there, when you see how that lands, this is how we got here. No, Congress would not have done. You're defending this agency and you're completely ignoring the very well known, well documented, and well reported instances of it functioning as a front for destabilizing the nations that it operates in. You had something, Keaton?
Well, yeah. First of all, an injustice to a bureaucracy somewhere is an injustice to bureaucracies everywhere. No, but it is funny how this was stuff like this, incidents like this, is what makes us view, at least makes me view the Bernie movement in 2016 as the canary in the coal mine. And that was a movement out of which she kind of grew. Like, I wasn't familiar with her at the time, but she was elected to Congress in, what was it, 2018? I think, so she was one of the founding squad members, right? And the whole sort of, thesis put forward by that movement was that institutional rot coincides with or goes side by side with a decaying quality of life for working people. When these democratic institutions fail people view them not as sacred pillars of our civilization, but as bargaining chips to trade in for something better and easier. And that's what's happening now. Now you have a majority of the population willing to just trade in any semblance of representative democracy and like collective deliberation. They're trading that in for a strongman, which was entirely predictable. Not only was it predictable, but like people like Elon Omar, like the Bernie 2016 movement, we were the people screaming that the loudest at that time that this was inevitable if the Democrats at the time did not change course, and we know how that went.
Right. And Ilhan Omar has completely given away her credibility by putting herself in a position where she's defending an organization that I'm sure she knows is a CIA front. I'm sure she knows that better than most, not being from America. All right, so let's see the rest of what she had to say.
I am exceptionally upset about USAID. I lived in a refugee camp for 4 years as a child surviving civil war. It is the essential programs that USAID provided that kept my family and I fed and safe. It is the resources that so many people around the world rely on. And it is our soft power. Oftentimes, people interact with our country through the military. That does not create love for us, and it certainly does not keep us safe. When the world...
All right, so Greenwald had Mike Benz on, who we'll be hearing a little bit of his interview with Joe Rogan, and he asked him about this. He said, well, what about people who say these water programs, these food programs, these HIV prevention programs are going to get shut down? And he made the point, and I think based on the reporting, this is probably true, that anytime they're doing that, there's a motive behind it. They're doing something behind that program. They're using that program as a shield. So I don't doubt that what she's saying is true, but I'm sure there's more to whatever organization she was interacting with in Somalia was actually doing there.
Well, also, if I could
And
just
again, I'm
one very
sure
quick,
she knows that.
yeah, if I could just interject one quick thing. I know it's a long segment. I don't even mean to fuck you up, but when she says, at the end there, it is just, this also speaks to the hypocrisy and the failure of the squad and people like Ilhan Omar. It takes a lot of balls after voting for Ukraine package after Ukraine package after Ukraine package to use the phrase soft power.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So, she wasn't the only one there. She was part of one of those patented Democratic Party cringe fests. So here's a little more of that before they had their own January 6th there. Stormed the building.
Probably saw Elon Musk and his crew put a gag order on AID employees. They disconnected them from email, which is putting lives at risk around the world. So we are here to enter the building, and so we can hear firsthand from whoever is here at AID, or at least witness firsthand what is happening with this Elon Musk attempted takeover, which will not stand. We will prevail. Let's go.
I don't know. Where are the Capitol Police?
Yeah, where's the
Looks
National
like a
Guard?
riot to me.
Here they
Look
come.
at them. Look at them. They're storming the building. Nobody stopped them. I think that guy's got a glass of kombucha there. That can be dangerous.
I mean, if they get locked up, the only hope of getting them out would be to elect Amy Goodman president, and she can pardon them.
Okay, so that's what a Democratic Party riot looks like. No wonder they lost. All right, so in a more serious vein, the Democrats finally figured out a process response. Democratic Senator Brian Schatz put us a hold on Trump's State Department nominees. He gave a little press conference about this.
If you want to change an agency, introduce a bill and pass a law. You cannot wave away an agency that you don't like or that you disagree with by executive order or by literally storming into the building and taking over the servers. That is not how the American system of government works. That's number one. Number two is, it is true that there will be suffering all over the world. There already is suffering all over the world as a result of this. But it's not just that. It's that instability from starvation and disease will visit us in the United States of America. There is a reason that USAID is an arm of American foreign policy, and it is because we understand that a stable world means a stable America. And in the
Okay. All right. So once again, the Democrats are going to pretend that this is UNICEF. That this organization is just feeding starving children around the world. It's not being used as an instrument to destabilize nations. It's not being used as an instrument of real politic to counter our perceived geopolitical enemies. All they're doing is feeding needy children and giving people condoms, which, as we will see, is total bullshit. At the same time, what he's saying is not wrong. The actions that Trump is taking right now are just a complete end run around the Constitution and the checks and balances of our government. Now, yes, the system's not working anymore. It's been so completely taken over by oligarchs, by money, that no matter who wins an election, the people have very little say in the government. What the Trump administration is doing is just getting rid of the illusion of democracy entirely and saying, we're just going to run things. We're just going to centralize everything in the executive. You guys sue. Good luck with that. By the time you're done, we'll have gone through the government systems. We'll have fired people. We'll have shut down agencies or made it impossible for them to function. and let that wind through the courts for several years. Courts that, by the way, I've stacked with my appointees, particularly the Supreme Court. So good luck getting this reversed. And again, I understand. Like, I can't make an argument that you could get some kind of reform of U.S. aid through the Congress. Look at what they're saying. Look at what they're saying. They won't even acknowledge the sins of this agency.
Right.
So yeah, sure. But you need to own what you're endorsing if you are in fact full-throatedly supporting these actions. You are endorsing a reversion to authoritarian fascism. That is what you are endorsing. Now, if you've decided, well, democracy doesn't work, I'm not in that fight anymore, I don't want to be in that fight, okay, but own it. Own it. Admit what you are supporting. You are supporting fascism. You are for fascism. You don't believe democracy works, and I think you have reasons to believe that. Just go ahead and make a case for fascism then. Be honest. Don't pretend this is legal. It's not legal. We all know it's not legal. But you hate US aid so much with good reason. All right, so make the case. But don't pretend that this is consistent with some kind of democratic norms. Don't pretend it's a revolution. Sure, it's a fascist revolution. So to explain this a little more, what this maneuver the Democrats are taking is, a hold is essentially a threat to prevent a speedy vote for a nominee in the full Senate. It forces Republicans to jump through hoops and burn floor time to confirm nominees, which adds up when there are many lower level nominees who might otherwise get fast tracked to the floor for votes. Nominees require majorities to be confirmed in the Senate. Republicans have 53 senators, so Democrats cannot scuttle Trump's picks on their own, but they can drag out the process and detract from other nominees or bills that GOP leaders prefer to spend time on. Republicans extensively used holds on nominees to protest President Joe Biden's policies over the last 4 years. In 2023, Tommy Tuberville placed a hold on over 400 military promotions for 10 months in 2023 in protest of the Defense Department's abortion travel policy. Senator Josh Hawley briefly placed a blanket hold on civilian nominees for the State Department and the Pentagon in 2021 in protest of the Biden administration's handling of the military withdrawal from Afghanistan. And a group of Senate Republicans placed holds on Biden's nominees, including judicial nominees, in the wake of court cases that were brought against Trump last year. So when you hear all the people who inevitably are going to start screaming about how they're sabotaging Trump and this isn't proper, remember, this is not something Republicans had any hesitation to do in the previous administration. This is not an unheard of thing. So speaking of Democrats not in any way being willing to acknowledge what USAID actually does, Amy Klobuchar, shutting down USAID is not about efficiency. It's about undermining America's global leadership. USAID counters extremism, fights diseases, and creates more markets for U.S. exports. She's almost telling the truth there. She's just saying it as a positive. This is reckless and dangerous. So Glenn responded to this. The least surprising thing is watching Democrats defend the CIA front known as USAID, deceitfully depicting it as just some nice organization that wants to help. And this article, if you want to look it up, it's still linked online. I checked. This was a very infamous case where they went in as USAID to set up a Twitter in Cuba that would just be sports and weather. And in their own leaked internal memos, they planned on, once they had a big enough audience, flipping the script and trying to use it to incite an uprising and an overthrow of the government. So this is very typical. This is very typical. I want to say this is very much like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Nobody on the right, most people in MAGA had never heard of it until Humpty Dumpty went on Joe Rogan and called it woke. And 2 days later, everybody was an expert. That's very much what's going on with USAID. This is an organization that the left, and particularly communists, have been screaming against for decades.
Right.
For decades. All of a sudden now, it's a Marxist organization. USAID was a viper's nest of radical left Marxists who hate America.
I mean, such an illiterate thing to say.
Such a moron. And here's Vijay Prashad. Actually, Elon Musk, radical left Marxists such as myself detest USAID. It was a viper's nest of liberal imperialists. Yes.
Right.
Yes. All right. So here, Jackson Hinkle actually tweeted this out. And it's a pretty good little video. Foreign aid is when the poor people of a rich country send money to the rich people of a poor country. This is Michael Parenti's take on what U.S. foreign aid is really about generally.
The economist Ray Brown, when he went to Cuba before the revolution, it was in 1958, he was there about a year or so before, was impressed by how every major road he saw went from a sugar plantation to a refinery to the seaport. While there were whole communities without roads, that couldn't get to doctors, that couldn't have schools, couldn't see a priest, the sugar companies had their roads. And when you send foreign aid to those countries, 9 out of 10 of those dollars goes to build the infrastructure, to subsidize the capital investment of the private corporations, or to pay for the police and the army of that country, not to defend it from foreign invasion, because Uruguay is not going to invade Bolivia, because Taiwan isn't going to be invaded by the Philippines. But they need those big armies to defend their rulers from their own people, because those people are in such a state of immiseration. So that's where our foreign aid goes. And as someone once said, foreign aid is when the poor people, that's us, of a rich country, give money to the rich people of a poor country.
Well said, as always. This is a little clip with some animation of, if you've ever read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, it gets into this pretty thoroughly, how our foreign aid functions as a front for our corporations and our intelligence services working for those corporations. So there's just a little bit about that.
We economic hitmen have managed to create the world's first truly global empire, and it's basically a secret empire. We do it many ways, but principally we identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. The money never actually goes to the country. It goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country that help a few very wealthy people, but don't benefit the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity or have cars to drive on the highways, and yet they're left holding a huge debt that they can't repay. So we go back at some point and say, you know, you can't pay your debts. Give us a pound of flesh. Sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Vote with us on the next critical UN vote. Allow us to build a military base in your backyard. Something along these lines. And when we fail, the jackals go in and either overthrow or assassinate these leaders. And if the jackals fail, as they did in Iraq, then we send in the military. I don't think the failure is capitalism. I think it's a specific kind of capitalism where we've developed, we've created what I consider a mutant viral form of capitalism. And this mutant form of capitalism, which I think is really a predatory form of capitalism, has created an extremely unstable, unsustainable, unjust, and very, very dangerous world.
And I assure you, Amy Klobuchar is very well aware of that.
I've met a lot of terrorists.
Certainly Ilhan Omar.
I've never met one who wanted to be a terrorist. They're desperate people. If we want to get rid of terrorism, we must get rid of the root causes, that cancer that is destroying our whole system. Because I think it's really important that we understand today we cannot have homeland security unless we understand that the whole planet is our homeland.
All right, so this is, it's very good. So this is Mike Benz. He went on the Joe Rogan show and actually exposed a much wider audience to USAID and what it does. You want to throw that up?
Yep. Okay. So, of course, once again, we're doing audio only, so to not step on any toes.
USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy. Now USAID is, a very notorious. It's sort of a switch player. There's no aid in USAID, by the way. That's your brain is being tricked when you see the phrase USAID. It's not an aid organization. The aid in USAID stands for U.S. Agency for International Development. It is developing internationally around the world all of the institutions that the State Department needs to use. So when they are capacity building activist groups in a foreign country, that's because the State Department wants those activists there. Now, USAID, for the first time in its history, it was created in the early 1960s by JFK, 1961. It was created because you had all of this intelligence, statecraft, and military support and logistical aid that was tripping over itself, basically. The military would be funding, would be running aid to certain groups in the region. The State Department would be running aid to certain groups in the region. The intelligence community would, and there was no sort of central coordinator of those capacity building operations. So USAID, by the way, is a $50 billion budget. The entirety of the intelligence community is only $72 billion. So it is more than the CIA and more than the State Department.
Wow.
And aid is basically USAID is effectively a switch player to assist the Pentagon with on the national security front, to assist the State Department on the national interest front, or to assist the intelligence community on a sort of clandestine operations front. So,
all right. So think of it this way: in the post-World War II decolonizing era, you can't just send the troops in and occupy the world anymore, right? So if you're going to have a global empire, how are you going to have a global empire? Well, you've got to find more clandestine means to control the world. It's not the British Empire. You can't just send the redcoats and the pith helmets in, right? You got to find craftier ways to do it. So you develop these aid organizations. Why is USAID getting all of that money? Because that is taking the place of overt colonization. You send in these aid organizations. That is a way of colonizing these countries under the guise of foreign aid. That is the function that it serves. That's why it gets so much money. It's not getting all that money to give people porridge.
Right.
So this Mike Benz tweeted this out. USAID literally set up fake AIDS prevention workshops to topple foreign governments. Beginning as early as October 2009, a project overseen by the U.S. Agency for International Development sent Venezuelan, Costa Rican, and Peruvian young people to Cuba in hopes of ginning up rebellion. The travelers worked undercover, often posing as tourists, and traveled around the island scouting for people they could turn into political activists. In one case, the workers formed an HIV prevention workshop that memos called the perfect excuse for the program's political goals, a gambit that could undermine America's efforts to improve health globally. They also did this in Pakistan. They set up a fake vaccine drive. That's one of the most famous incidents. USAID actually got caught, and the CIA had to put out a non-binding letter. Glenn talks about this in his interview with Mike Benz. They had to actually put out a non-binding letter saying they wouldn't use health programs as a front anymore. Wyatt Reed here from Gray Zone. Remember when NED paid rappers, artists, actors, and sponsored, quote, transgender dance performances to destabilize Bangladesh politics? Sure would be a shame if they were permanently defunded. As I said earlier, Wyatt, that's a nice thought. That's not what they're doing. That's not what they're doing.
And just everybody knows NED, National Endowment for
Democracy. All right, so this is creepy. Of course, Max had a lot to say about all this. Now this is from 2023. The USAID sponsored Visa and Google assisted Dia app not only forces Ukrainian into a digital ID panopticon, it encourages them to snitch on fellow citizens, reporting them as Russian collaborators so they can be arrested and disappeared. Now, this video is creepy and dystopian as hell. This is a good example of what your tax dollars are going to with USAID.
4 bonds aimed at rebuilding the liberated and soon-to-be deoccupied Ukrainian cities. State mortgage. Military, medics, teachers, and scientists can apply for the state mortgage right in the app. E-Enemy, a chatbot that helps any citizen safely transfer info about the location of Russian troops, names of collaborators, and enemy movements to the armed forces. Numerous attacks of Russian army destroyed a number of TV towers. To provide Ukrainians with uninterrupted access to information, we launched Dia Radio and Dia TV, so that even under blackouts, millions could feel present. And added the in-app Army of Drones game to help Ukrainians both distract and donate to the common purpose. Has the enemy launched cyber attacks on Ukraine? Of course they have, and they failed. Even when the world is falling apart, our main task is to protect the people. Together, we can build a stronger one.
Creepy. This is the president of El Salvador chiming in, Nayib Bukele, who actually is Palestinian, apparently. Most governments don't want USAID funds flowing into their countries because they understand where much of that money actually ends up. While marketed as support for development, democracy, and human rights, the majority of these funds are funneled into opposition groups, NGOs with political agendas, and destabilizing movements. At best, maybe 10% of the money reaches real projects that help people in need. And, that tracks exactly with what Parenti said, $1 out of every 10. There are such cases, but the rest is used to fuel dissent, finance protests, and undermine administrations that refuse to align with the globalist agenda. Cutting this so-called aid isn't just beneficial for the United States, it's also a big win for the rest of the world. Glenn responded to that. USAID, like the National Endowment for Democracy, are well-documented CIA fronts that are designed to manipulate other countries' internal politics for the benefits of DC elites and nobody else in the US. Both agencies have wrought destruction and can't die soon enough. And this is Max also responding to him. Bukele is right. And while USAID infiltrates societies and trains regime change chaos agents, the US regime sanctions politically independent countries and cuts them off from multilateral development programs that actually produce results. This is Kit Clarenberg, kind of fusing the woke complaint that you're hearing more from MAGA than the geopolitical complaint. Absolutely wild stuff. USAID is a multi-billion-dollar annual global corruption and money laundering racket, carrying out coups and destabilization while handing out free condoms, waving rainbow flags, and enriching tiny captured sections of target countries. It's beyond satire. And this is a good example of what we've often talked about domestically, about how the LGBTQ agenda, DEI, all of these concepts function to cover up a deeply corrupt corporate agenda. They need this to pretend that what they're doing is actually motivated by a desire to help people. If they did not have that movement, they'd have to invent it. And many would argue, and I would agree, that to a large extent, these same intelligence services did invent it.
Well, we've been playing the woke card against Russia for almost 1,000 years. I mean, Russia stayed Orthodox when most of Europe went Catholic, so they were unwoke back then too.
Right.
That's always been a pretext. Yeah.
There you go. So here's another one, just getting a little more into USAID sins. Former fake Venezuelan president Juan Guaido is one of the largest single recipients of USAID support in recent years. You can see them below with members of the Colombian narco cartel Los Rastrojos, who assisted USAID's stunt on the Venezuelan border in 2019. And here's Aaron. The U.S. government funding propaganda and disinformation via USAID and NED is a legitimate issue. An equal issue is the fact that establishment media outlets often cite these same USAID, NED funded groups without acknowledging their U.S. state funding. One example among many is Bellingcat, an open source, in quotes, website which U.S. media never identifies as NED NATO state funded. Why does private media conceal state propaganda? Taibbi has actually gotten into Bellingcat and some of his reporting about the censorship industrial complex. So now we've laid out a pretty clear case. All the worst things you ever heard about USAID are absolutely true. Yes, the Democrats are covering up the reality of what this agency is, trying to cloak themselves in this mask of defending institutions when really they're just defending a horrible realpolitik CIA front organization. Yes, absolutely. So Trump's press secretary, I'm sure when she goes out there to talk about what's wrong with USAID, is going to talk about coups, is going to talk about the way it functions to destabilize autonomous nations, that it hurts our image in the world. I'm sure that's what she's going to address.
Over the past several years, these are some of the insane priorities that organization has been spending money on. $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. I don't know about you, but as an American taxpayer, I don't want my dollars going towards this crap, and I know the American people don't either, and that's exactly what Elon Musk has been tasked by President Trump to do, to get the fraud, waste, and abuse out of our federal government. Thank you, guys.
That's weird. That's weird. She didn't actually address any of the major she didn't talk about the Cuba fake Twitter thing. She didn't talk about the Pakistan vaccine drive. She didn't talk about any of that. She just talked about woke stuff that actually didn't cost nearly as much as those other efforts to destabilize governments did. Maybe Marco Rubio can clear this up for us. Libs of TikTok seemed to like what he had to say. Marco Rubio, spitting pure fire. Fire, I tells you.
Well, look, I mean, my frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so. So the functions of USAID, there are a lot of functions of USAID that are going to continue, that are going to be part of American foreign policy, but it has to be aligned with American foreign policy. I said very clearly during my confirmation hearing that every dollar we spend and every program we fund, that will be aligned with the national interest of the United States. And USAID has a history of sort of ignoring that and deciding that there's somehow a global charity separate from the national interest. These are taxpayer dollars. And so I'm very troubled by these reports that they've been unwilling to cooperate with people who are asking simple questions about what does this program do, who gets the money, who are our contractors, who's funded. And that sort of level of insubordination makes it impossible to conduct a sort of mature and serious review that I think foreign aid writ large should have. We're spending.
Okay. So he didn't actually say a single word about how he's disturbed by their clandestine operations overseas. He emphatically said that they're not disbanding USAID. They want to bring it to heel. He didn't say he's disturbed by the fact that it functions as a front organization for the intelligence services. He said he's disturbed essentially by it functioning as a rogue agency. He feels that they don't have enough control over what they do. But he didn't say anything about being bothered by any of this stuff that everyone's talking about. You wanted to say something, Keith?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it sounds to me in that little soundbite like he's saying they were not subservient enough to the
They're
U.S.
not
empire.
subservient enough to the U.S. empire. Yeah, he actually complained about them functioning as a charity.
Yeah,
that seemed to be his complaint. He didn't want them doing that kind of thing.
that's strange because we just showed a whole lot of evidence to show they're pretty subservient.
They're pretty subservient to the goals
I mean,
of
subservient
U.S.
probably
empire.
isn't even the right word. They are an arm of it.
They are an arm of the global empire. Yeah.
Apparently not enough.
Apparently not enough, and apparently they're too woke. They're too woke. You see, when they want you looking over here, they're gonna go woke, so you don't look at what they're doing over here. Oh, look, it's woke. It's woke. They're not actually going to direct you to the actual problem. And listen, man, I expect that from MAGA because they like to hear that, and that's why they feed that to that. There's a lot of people who should know better who are not asking these questions. So somebody who does know better, naturally, is Caitlin Johnston. Oh my God, this is what you guys got so excited about? A soft power organ of the U.S. government getting reshuffled under the State Department, the U.S. government's primary soft power agency under Marco Bloody Rubio. Only by the most rigorous mental gymnastics is this significant. Thank you, Caitlin.
It made me hungry for a blooming onion. She said bloody.
And Outback Steakhouse. I shouldn't even do that. Now all the Aussies are gonna be like, that was terrible. That didn't sound anything like an Australian. My wife used to say I sounded like a pirate whenever I tried to do Australian. Dan Cohen. Yesterday, Elon Musk was calling USAID a criminal organization that must die. Yeah, he says a lot of things, Dan. Now it's confirmed that USAID has been reshuffled into Marco Rubio's State Department, and Musk's top influencers are going along with the Trump administration's charade. The empire isn't going away, it's reconstituting. Exactly. Whitney, of course. Putting a regime change cheerleading neocon like Rubio in charge doesn't mean the corruption at USAID ends now. Quit being taken for a ride.
Such negativity.
Yeah, she's blackpilling everybody like she does. So she elaborated on this. Folks, if you're allergic to black pills, there's a good time to go get a beer. For people saying Elon is trustworthy and USAID is bad, do you guys remember Elon's "we will coup whoever we want, deal with it" statement over the 2019 coup in lithium-rich Bolivia that he was poised to benefit from? It's funny, people seem to have forgotten that. Even if USAID is completely dismantled, that certainly does not mean that regime change ops will stop. Oligarchs can just fund them directly. They largely control the controversial NGOs that USAID funded anyway. Sorry for raining on the parade, but handing over major government ops to intelligence and military-linked oligarchs is unlikely to be the win against the deep state you think it is. It is ultimately a deeper centralization of power, and historically that doesn't end well. Thank you, Whitney, for the customary words of wisdom that are too often lacking in these spaces. Here's Brian Berlatic, former Marine and expert in this area. Everyone's celebrating USAID's website going down and its X account disappearing. Need to take a moment and think. If USAID, NED, IRI, NDI are actually eliminated, the work they are doing will be transferred back to covert operations conducted by organizations like the CIA, making them more difficult to detect and expose. This will enhance, not deter, U.S. interference abroad. The NED, even before the Trump administration took office, had for months been taking down financial disclosures. Something is obviously going on, and people should avoid jumping to conclusions before they are certain as to what it is. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio himself said foreign aid was only on pause and that much of the funding would eventually resume. The Trump administration is telling us it will continue pursuing regime change and military confrontation around the globe, including and especially with Iran and China. Do we honestly think they will abandon subversion and interference as tools? No, obviously not. Now, Berlitic had an interesting exchange with Elon Musk. Elon tweeted out, "Those who know, please reply to this post listing all the evil things that NED has done. It's a long list." So Berlitic responded with a video. Democracy is a process of self-determination. Thus, a U.S. organization posing as promoting democracy abroad is obviously involved in political interference the U.S. should not tolerate any other nation conducting against the U.S. itself. Then he goes on about what Whitney mentioned, Elon's former avowed support for coups, but says, hey, I was a Marine. I once fought for U.S. empire. Maybe you're changing your mind. But then he kind of does his mic drop here. Finally, if we're investigating NED and want to reform USAID, why is the U.S. under Trump putting Secretary Rubio in charge of USAID after he spent years eagerly advancing the NED's agenda on the board of directors of its subsidiary, the International Republican Institute? Will he be investigated as well? And he includes this image of IRI congratulating board member Senator Marco Rubio on his nomination as U.S. Secretary of State. Folks, it's a big club and you ain't in it. You are not in the club. Now, finally, this is kind of an epilogue, little philosophical reverie. Marco Rubio said something very interesting and uncharacteristically honest about the course that U.S. empire is likely to take over the next few years.
Brazil, in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
Holy shit. Whoa. Is that little Marco? Little Marco say that? Well, our friend Nick Cruz really appreciated that. Watching the U.S. empire dismantle itself is hilarious. I've been waiting for this my entire life. I didn't honestly expect MAGA to wave the white flag so early and in such embarrassing fashion. On a more serious note, and this is what we want to end with, I would like to discuss this because I think the questions that Arnaud Bertrand raises here are very interesting. Because, yes, of course, we're saying, well, don't you see what they're really doing? And sure, they're not dismantling any of this, but they may very well be downsizing it. And that's what Bertrand seems to believe. It's becoming clearer and clearer that we're looking at a seismic shift in the U.S.'s relationship with the world between, one, the U.S. dismantling its foreign interference apparatuses like USAID, Marco Rubio stating that we're now in a multipolar world with multi-great powers in different parts of the planet, and that the post-war global order is not just obsolete, it is now a weapon being used against us. 3, the tariffs on supposed allies like Mexico, Canada, or the EU. This is the U.S. effectively saying our attempt at running the world is over. To each his own. We're now just another great power, not the indispensable nation. It looks, quote, dumb, as the Wall Street Journal just wrote, if you are still mentally in the old paradigm. But it's always a mistake to think that what the U.S. or any country does is dumb. I might debate Mr. Bertrand about that, but okay, continue. Hegemony was going to end sooner or later, and now the U.S. is basically choosing to end it on its own terms. It is the post-American world order brought to you by America itself. Even the tariffs on allies viewed under this angle make sense as it redefines the concept of allies. They don't want, or maybe rather can't afford, vassals anymore, but rather relationships that evolve based on current interests. You can either view it as decline, because it does unquestionably look like the end of the American empire, or as avoiding further decline, controlled withdrawal from imperial commitments in order to focus resources on core national interests rather than being forced into an even messier retreat at a later stage. In any case, it is the end of an era. And while the Trump administration looks like chaos to many observers, they're probably much more attuned to the changing realities of the world and their own country's predicament than their predecessors. Acknowledging the existence of a multipolar world and choosing to operate within it, rather than trying to maintain an increasingly costly global hegemony, couldn't be delayed much further. It looks messy, but it is probably better than maintaining the fiction of American primacy until it eventually collapses under its own weight. This is not to say that the US won't continue to wreak havoc on the world. And in fact, we might be seeing it become even more aggressive than before, because when it previously was badly and very hypocritically trying to maintain some semblance of self proclaimed rules based order, it now doesn't have to pretend it is under any constraint, not even the constraint of playing nice with allies. It's the end of the US empire, but definitely not the end of the US as a major disruptive force in world affairs. And he ends with this. All in all, this transformation may mark one of the most significant shifts in international relations since the fall of the Soviet Union. And those most unprepared for it, as is already painfully obvious, are America's vassals, caught completely flat footed by the realization that the patron they've relied on for decades is now treating them as just another set of countries to negotiate with. I think he's probably got it right. I think he's probably nailed it. I would agree, all kidding aside, that it's always a mistake to assume that people are stupid for that to be your first assumption. They clearly thought through what they were going to do. Now, Trump may not completely understand this overall picture, and it's quite likely the people around him are using him to push this kind of an agenda. But when you see people very often say, well, why do we agree to these unfavorable trade deals? Why do we agree to these imbalances? Why are we protecting these countries? Why are we putting our troops there? It's not because we're stupid. It's not because we don't realize. We're buying them off. And we're maintaining a combination of a threat against people by putting our troops everywhere, and also a promise, hey, you have to do what we say or we'll stop defending you. These things are not done by accident. What Bertrand is arguing, I think maybe rightly, is the people behind Trump, at the very least, realize this is not sustainable. We need to start to wind this up. So our trade deals can no longer be a de facto means of maintaining alliances. They have to actually economically benefit our country because we just don't have the resources or won't for very much longer to maintain relations based on an assumption of, as Rubio pointed out, the dollar is the reserve currency. They see the end of that coming and they're saying, well, we could wrap this up now or we could do it the hard way later. So let's do it while we can control the process. That may be what's really behind this USAID thing. It is certainly not a care for the USAID functioning as a front for the intelligence services. They're not even talking about that. Rubio didn't talk about it. Trump's press secretary didn't talk about it. They don't give a shit about that. That's what they'll continue to do. But they're going to get rid of everything that they consider wasteful and try to pare it down to what they consider essential.
Yeah, our friend Anish Shivani always made the point that just like intuitively, MAGA is a recognition of the end of the U.S. empire. There's a recognition of that collapse embedded within it, even if it's not articulated by Trump, and even if it's not sort of consciously held at front of mind by the MAGA rank and file. Like this articulation of America first is that, in the sense that, when I was on the the line at the Trump rally when I did my New Hampshire coverage, and I'm going, up and down the line for blocks and blocks and blocks of the freezing cold. These people are lined up to see Trump, and you ask them about Ukraine, and they say, well, they should have to fight themselves. It's not for us to give them any money. And a lot of them had a similar answer to Israel. With Israel, there's a little more brainwashing there, obviously, coming from the top and from like religious communities, whatever. But even that, the MAGA base not huge on the Greater Israel Project, right? I mean, there's a huge
that
contingent
has
of
not
them.
been my experience when I've been in MAGA crowds.
Yeah,
They're
does not
going
see
along
that.
with it because the boss tells them they have to.
Right, exactly. So, when you look at the reluctance to get involved with other countries to their benefit, what you're really seeing is a great departure in longstanding bipartisan American orthodoxy, which is that America leading the world by example and by force is both feasible and desirable. And what this MAGA movement ultimately says somewhere within it is that no, leading the world by force and example is neither feasible nor should we want to. Right. And
Except
part
for
of, well, yes, exactly. Well, yes, like I said, there's a lot. That's a more loaded topic for different reasons that we will, we talk about quite often. But there is philosophically an acknowledgement that it is not in our interest, nor should it be in our interest to govern the world anymore. And what really offends the liberal class about this, what really offends the Democratic Party about this, quite frankly, is, as you saw, Joe Biden refused to let go of that idea, to let go of that idea to the point where he was willing to escalate in Ukraine and agitate for World War III. Because when you look at what Bertrand is saying there, when you talk about we could do this the easy way or the hard way, well, a lot of empires collapse after prolonged and grotesque and very costly military conflicts. And what this suggests is if we see the writing on the wall, hey, maybe we can pull back before it comes to that. So in other words, World War III with Russia, Iran, and China doesn't have to be the thing that brings us to imperial collapse. Maybe we can just wind it down before it comes to that. So yes, I do think he's right about that.
Please clap.